Give it just a second to start. Okay, so this is going to be the process for today. My name is Sandra Cosgrove. I'm a history professor here in Las Vegas at the College of Southern Nevada. This is going to be Unit 1 for the We the People's National Finals. So in a moment, I will have the judges introduce themselves, followed by the students, and then we'll begin the hearing. The students will deliver a 4-minute prepared statement, followed by 8 minutes of judges' questions. My microphone will be muted the whole time, and when it gets time, I'll do a 1 minute, and then I've got a piece of paper that says time. Besides that, I'll just be kind of in the background. I will be watching the chat, however, so if something happens or you have a question and you don't want to, break into somebody else speaking, just go ahead and put it over in the chat and I'll be able to take care of it. I would suggest using the gallery view rather than the speaker view, and that way you can see everybody. And at the conclusion of the hearings, the judges will give brief feedback to the teams, and then we'll be finished, and I'll stop the recording, and then you will exit this Zoom room. Are there any questions? No? All right. So I am going to go ahead and turn it over to the judges so that they can introduce themselves, and then we'll go over to the students and you can introduce yourselves. So take it away.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. We're excited to be here. As our facilitator mentioned, we'll introduce ourselves. We'll ask you to introduce yourselves and your teacher, and then we will go ahead and read the question and have a good conversation. My name is Charlie Hinderleiter. I'm the Director of Government Affairs of the St. Louis Realtors Association in St. Louis, Missouri. In the past, I've taught political science at Western Illinois University, Jefferson College, and Maryville University. Also, more moons ago than I would like to count, I was a student in the We the People program on the other side of the, virtual table in this instance. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm Karen Milton. I'm in New York City, and I am currently the Chief of Staff in the Office of the MTA Inspector General. That's the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, which oversees the subways, buses, and regional commuter trains for the New York City metropolitan area. I've been there since August 2019. In my prior life, I was the circuit executive, which is sort of like the chief operating officer of the federal courts of the Second Circuit, which are the states of the 13 federal courts in the states of New York, Vermont, and Connecticut. And we will leave it to another day for you to tell me why Vermont is part of the Second Circuit and not part of the First Circuit, which covers New England. But now, Mark, we will turn it over to you.
Good morning. I say good morning because I'm the West Coast judge. I'm in Reno, Nevada, and I've been practicing law for 27 years in commercial litigation, which quite frankly deals with a lot of constitutional issues. So there's a great overlap. I've coached and judged for the past 12 years, and what I'd like you all to do before you start, because you're right out of the chute, take a deep breath, give us what you've got, show off for us, because we know you have it all. So we're really excited to hear you today. Thank you.
Students, if you'd introduce yourselves.
My name is Pratik Shah. I'm on student council and a part of my school speech and debate team.
I'm Tyler Hughes, and I'm an avid reader.
I'm Hannah Larson, and in the fall I'll be going to ASU majoring in interior design.
All right, today we are doing question number 1. I'll read the question in its entirety and then you can begin. The American War is over, but this is far from being the case with the American Revolution. To what extent, if any, did revolutionary principles influence constitution making during the founding period? What problems, if any, does the principle of consent present when creating or amending constitutions? To what extent, if any, are revolutionary principles evident in modern times?
Benjamin Rush was correct. The revolution was not over. When the founders met in Philadelphia in 1787, they employed revolutionary principles upon which they built the revolutionary document, the U.S. Constitution.
Now, the founders did not create these revolutionary principles. They had predated America in its founding. The novel concept in American design was that the founders wove these principles together in order to create an entirely new form of government.
An initial revolutionary principle enlisted was limited government. Importantly, Roman philosopher Cicero recognized that governments were innately corrupt, so a solution, an equal balancing and blending of monarchy, democracy, and aristocracy. As well, Montesquieu argued for a separation of powers, further limiting government.
Since the founders experienced a tyrannical king in parliament and a failed Articles of Confederation, they established a limited government utilizing these philosophical theories. Articles 1, 2, and 3 divide the power between legislative, executive, and judicial, and give each the ability to check one another.
Then, to ensure the preservation of natural rights, another revolutionary principle was imbued when the Anti-Federalists insisted on the addition of a Bill of Rights. The colonists rebelled due to their lack of consent in Parliament. Thus, the founders granted the power to choose their representatives in Article 1, Section 2, and the revolutionary principle of popular sovereignty was knit into the Constitution.
The Declaration of Independence announces governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That is, that government is made legitimate only through consent. The U.S. achieved consent in the creation of the Constitution and its amendments through the principles of republicanism. Article 7 required specially elected conventions for ratification, and Article 1, Section 2, and the 17th Amendment meet the requirement of consent for the election of the members of Congress who represent the people in the amendment process outlined in Article 5.
In a more revolutionary light, modern constitutions try to achieve legitimacy through direct popular participation in the constitutional process, but not without challenges. According to the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, although popular participation leads to an increase in transparency and accountability, there is no proven link to subsequent legitimacy of government.
And the risk of depletion of resources due to high costs, manipulation of popular opinion by power brokers, and the possible violation of minority rights pose troubling challenges. Additionally, countries lacking civic education face increased challenges.
Revolutionary principles are evident globally now more than ever, yet they are also threatened. In Russia, China, and Turkey, the principle of limited government has been tested. These countries have constitutions that separate powers between the legislative and executive branches, but it is clear that the strong executives, Putin, Xi Jinping, and Erdogan, maintain absolute control. Without an independent judiciary, there is no sufficient check on their power.
Natural rights have also been challenged internationally for farmers in India, protesters in Hong Kong, and the Rohingyans in Myanmar.
Also, suffrage is the expression of the revolutionary principle of popular sovereignty, an expression that is continuously threatened by those in power. Recently, the coup in Myanmar, the cash for vote scandal in Egypt, and the elimination of poll watchers for the presidential election in Uganda represent this threat.
In the US, strict voter ID laws, reductions in early voting, particularly to mail-in ballots, and restrictions to voter registration all establish barriers to voting. Georgia's Election Integrity Act of 2021 is merely one recent example of this. Revolutionary principles, while present, are threatened by government abuse of power and rights.
Benjamin Rush understood that the revolutionary principles of the war will remain a driving force for the creation of our new government. What he may not have envisioned is the continued need to uphold these principles by subsequent generations. So, we echo the words of Rush for our generation and say, the revolution is not over.
All right, thank you for your statement. Karen, I think we're off to you for our first question.
Thank you, Charlie. So I just want to pick up on one of your last points. I think Tyler made it. How do subsequent generations, how does your generation and your children's generation, let's make it modern, how do subsequent generations uphold the principles of the founding fathers, especially with regard to their emphasis on the consent of the governed? You noted China, Russia, Turkey. These are countries with constitutions, and yet clearly there seems to be an issue with regard to whether the governed are consenting to be governed in the way that their executives are governing them.
So I think one way in which we can just uphold these principles, especially the principle of consent, is just by voting. Especially all of us are now reaching the age where we are now able to vote. And we see that in the 2020 election, we actually had a massive outturn of voters. And it is in this way that we can help shape our government.
Not only voting, but there are different powers, especially in the Arizona Constitution, that we can use. For example, referendum, recall, and initiative are 3 different ways that voters and adults can use their political influence to exert on political policies that they approve or disapprove of.
I'm going to take us back to the revolutionary theories and principles. You used a lot of reference to foreign countries and the challenges that are going there. But I want to bring it closer to home because John Locke argued that if the government fails to protect individual rights, revolutionary acts can be taken. Are we seeing that in the current times? And are what we're seeing with social reform, migrant issues and things of that, how do you relate the current environment in the United States to what the founding fathers contemplated?
Although Jefferson argued that we should have a revolution every 20 years, we have seen the United States take a different path. And as the preamble states, that man will be exposed to a lot of suffering before they actually use to challenge the state or overthrow the state. So although we have the right to revolution, we don't use this right because we have other policies that we can use to change or reform the government, such as recall and referendum, such as voting, or just using through the public streets or protests and riots can gauge political dissent within politics.
Also, civil disobedience, which was coined by African Americans during the Civil Rights Movement, is a good way to show that our revolutionary principle within the United States, and to show if we accept what is happening within the United States at this time period.
In the latter part of your opening statement, you said that government is currently abusing power and rights. So if that's the argument you're taking, what's the threshold? When's the right time for revolution?
I think the right time for revolution is when we've exhausted everything else. We have in our Constitution, Article 5, an amendment process through which we can add amendments to the Bill of Rights to further protect our rights as people. And then we also see through, obviously, recall, referendum, and initiative, we can also vote to add bills, especially on the state level. 26 states actually have referendum or initiative in regards to either amending their constitutions or just adding laws to the Constitution. But once it's impossible for the people to get their voice across in this way, and the government isn't listening to the people, I would say that is when we need a revolution.
The threshold for revolution is quite high. Hobbes argued that a revolution should only really take place when almost everyone's security is at stake. So when we see the colonists, we could see that all of the colonists were equally felt that their political freedoms were being violated by Great Britain. So although we do have minority rights being abused, whether it be Native Americans in their system of voting, BLM, or any other minority groups, until everyone's stake at security is threatened, or until a lot of individuals feel that they need to reform the government instead of choosing other apparatuses, there won't be a revolution.
You've emphasized, I have a question on voting. You've emphasized the importance of voting and how voting can be an alternative and an antidote to revolution. There are a number of states out of the 50, I think 30 up to 34, that have proposed various new voting measures, which many people are interpreting as restricting voting rights. For example, the Georgia bill, while there may be very good things in it, also has some things that it's a misdemeanor now to give food or water to somebody waiting on a line. They've restricted the number of ballot boxes, especially in Fulton County, which is Atlanta, with a high African-American population. So how do you reconcile this? If voting is so important and voting is what sort of is our sacred right or saves this country, then why do we see so many states putting forth legislation that can be interpreted on many fronts as being restrictive of voting rights, especially for minority populations, or more importantly, poor populations, people who have a 9-to-5 job and maybe can't take off the day to go vote?
The reason that they are limiting the voting process to these people is in Arizona itself, we are also limiting the process by if you don't vote early voting within the first two new elections, like presidential elections, then they can cross your name off the early voting list, and you'll have to go to these, get in the line and put in your voting process. And I believe that they're doing this because they're afraid of what the people's opinion in those lower groups will be, either to remove them from office or to change the way that the office is being run by changing political parties and changing ideas that are being put into there.
One of the big arguments that like state senators are making in regards to passing these bills is that they want to define the legitimacy of these elections, especially after all the controversy surrounding the 2020 election. So specifically in Arizona with the SB 1485, the bill that Tyler was mentioning, the Republican state senators actually said that this bill was specifically because they wanted to make sure that elections would be legitimate. So even though it is going to restrict minority rights, they say that it's necessary.
One of the ways that we can essentially reconcile this way of voting can be seen in Arizona itself. The Native American Rights Fund, along with many different political science experts, all got together Native American reservations who have long been devoid of the right to vote because of their mail balloting have a complex system. They don't have a permanent address, and just polling places aren't really near these locations. So voting drives have been taking place in part of the Native American Rights Fund to get these Native American voters more accessible to voting, to get them registered in order so they can have a voice in political policies.
We have just a few seconds, so I want to use all the time. You had mentioned natural rights multiple times in your opening statement. How does that tie in with this right of voting? And is the voting, would you qualify it as a natural right, or would it be more of a fall under the social contract that they have with your government? And if voting is the sole, I'm going to ask you if I can. And so can you respond to that? How you tie in the concept of natural rights to voting?
Real quick.
Natural rights is the rights that we are given at birth, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as stated in our Declaration of Independence. So as such, voting should be a part of that natural right, because it is the right of our pursuit of happiness, because it gives us the way that we can vote for our people that will help us assure that our country and our soul of America will stay as it is and will continue to expand.
All right. Round of applause. Yay. Good job. Okay, now the judges are going to do some quick follow-up.
Well, I guess I'll kick it off. I thought, oh, Tyler, are you okay? Sorry.
It's been a rough couple of weeks. It hasn't rained in Arizona in a while, and
Yeah.
I have very severe allergies. So
Oh, my sympathies, and Gesundheit. So I just want to commend you guys. I thought you were, I thought all of you participated fully. We threw you, I thought, a couple of curveballs, didn't quite stick to the script. I found you very responsive. I found your understanding and your knowledge, both of the law and of politics and ancient times, modern times, and of course our favorite, the age of the revolution, to be really good. So great job. Thank you very much for letting me share in this conversation with you. Charlie?
Thank you much. I concur with my colleague. You guys really covered a wide range of territory in your prepared statement. When you talk consent of the governed, I particularly enjoyed you guys throwing in Article 1 in the 17th Amendment. I thought that was creative, as well as taking that revolutionary principles globally instead of just looking within the United States. I thought that was a unique and interesting way to do that. And throughout the conversation, I like that you guys were able to bring it locally. I liked you were able to talk about the Arizona Constitution and current Arizona legislation. I think that really shows an understanding of not just what's happening at the federal level, but how that applies to your state as well. Really just some good detail, good conversation. I appreciated it. Thank you.
Here's the trouble with going last, as you all know, is that all the great stuff has been covered first. So I'm going to take a little bit different tact, but I really want to emphasize what Charlie just said, is that you covered such a broad range of approach to this topic. It was so cool to see how you expanded it in history and recent events as well. Now, I thought you all were excellent speakers. That's what I look at. Can you present? It's not just what you say, it's how you say it and the confidence you exude when you're saying it. You all were fantastic at that, especially coming out of the chute right off the bat, and this is what you've got to do. So I think you started your team off fantastic. I loved how you came back at me, because I was trying to see, flesh out this, hey, can we start revolutions now? And how you handled that, and you gave a better context of current, there's other options. We don't have to, back in that day, yes, all you did pick up guns and you revolt against the government, but the times have changed. So again, the takeaway is fantastic coverage of the material. 2, your presentation skills were great. And 3, you were responsive to our questions. So there's not much more you can do. So I just want to compliment you on that. Thank you.
Thank you.